We often think of corporate control as, just spreadsheets, compliance checklists, and routine audits. But the reality? The culture set by leadership can literally be a matter of life and death. It's that razor-thin line between a thriving, healthy business and a massive, devastating corporate crime. Let's dive right into this explainer and see exactly how this breaks down. We're going to start in Bangladesh back in 2013 with the horrific collapse of the Rana Plaza building. This was an 8-story structure completely packed with garment factories. And the crazy thing is, despite explicit warnings of dangerous cracks in the walls, workers were ordered to just return to their sewing machines. The result? The deadliest structural failure in modern history. It claimed an unbelievable 1,129 lives and left over 2,500 people injured. The human cost of a disaster like this is honestly almost impossible to comprehend. But this specific quote brings it right into a visceral focus. Trapped under this massive rubble of concrete and machinery, with her arm literally pinned under a lifeless body, a survivor made this horrifying plea to rescuers. She was willing to amputate her own right hand just to escape. This right here is the ultimate, catastrophic consequence of prioritizing aggressive cost-cutting over fundamental ethical boundaries. So, following the collapse, global brands that were manufacturing in that factory and in similar emerging markets faced absolutely immense backlash. It forced a really harsh spotlight onto this deadly tension. On one side, you've got the relentless corporate drive for lower production costs, and on the other, the basic human rights and safety of the workers. Companies like Disney ended up pulling their production out of the country entirely, while other brands were forced to completely rethink how far down their supply chain their responsibility actually goes. Section 1. The Anatomy of Fraud, the Psychology of Misconduct. Now, you might be wondering, how do seemingly normal people allow such catastrophic failures to happen? Well, we really have to look at the psychology of it all. Decades ago, a sociologist named Donald Cressy interviewed incarcerated white-collar criminals and found that trusted individuals actually turned to deceit when 3 specific elements aligned perfectly. He called this the fraud triangle. These 3 elements are absolutely crucial to understand. First up is an unshareable pressure. This could be a hidden gambling addiction, sudden crushing debt, or even just intense performance metrics at work that an employee feels they simply can't admit they're failing at. Second, there's opportunity. This usually pops up from weak internal oversight, where the person suddenly realizes, hey, I actually have the access to exploit this system. And finally, rationalization. The perpetrator doesn't see themselves as a criminal. They convince themselves they're just borrowing the funds, or maybe that the company owes them because they're underpaid. Section 2. The Fraud Diamond, adding the missing link. So Cress's triangle was the gold standard for decades, right? But later criminologists Wolf and Hermanson realized it was actually incomplete. While pressure and rationalization might push someone toward an open door of opportunity, they found it takes a 4th, indispensable element to actually walk through that door, take the money, and cover the tracks. And that element is capability. The fraud diamond shows us that without this capability, the crime simply isn't going to happen. Capability means the perpetrator must have the specific intelligence to actually understand complex accounting systems. They need the confidence to lie completely convincingly to auditors and the stress tolerance to handle the immense pressure of living a double life. Basically, you need the right person in the right place with the exact right skills to pull off a major corporate fraud. And here's where leadership comes directly into play. It's a real game changer when you realize this capability to commit fraud is very often nurtured by toxic management styles. A purely transactional management style breeds deep resentment, which just feeds right into that rationalization to steal. Meanwhile, an aggressive pay-for-performance model puts such intense pressure on employees that they literally feel forced to manipulate data or take dangerous safety shortcuts just to survive in their roles. Section 3. 4 Levers of Control, the Strategic Solution. So what does this all mean for management? How do leaders encourage high performance without creating a toxic environment that just invites disaster? Well, Harvard professor Robert Simons answered this exact problem with his 4 levers of control. It's basically a framework designed to find that perfect sweet spot between employee freedom and strict organizational restriction. The first lever here is diagnostic controls. Think of these as the dials on an airplane dashboard. They track progress against preset goals, sales targets, budgets, efficiency metrics. But relying on this alone is highly dangerous. For example, the retailer Nordstrom once set extreme diagnostic sales per hour targets. The pressure got so high that managers actually forced employees to work off the clock just to inflate their metrics. That little shortcut resulted in over $15 million in lawsuits. To counter the intense pressure of those diagnostic metrics, organizations desperately need belief systems. Think of this as the warm, sunny yang of the corporate culture. These are concise, deeply inspiring statements that communicate core values. When Johnson & Johnson faced the Tylenol poisoning crisis, it was their deeply embedded belief system, their famous credo prioritizing customer safety above all else, that guided their leadership to immediately pull the product, ultimately saving their reputation. But of course, inspiration needs strict limits, which brings us to the yin of the equation, boundary systems. These are the cold, dark breaks of the organization. Boundary systems clearly and negatively outline what employees must never do. They don't tell you how to innovate, they tell you which lines you absolutely cannot cross. Things like prohibiting bribes or refusing to work with unvetted, dangerous suppliers. It protects the company from catastrophic reputational damage. Finally, we have the fourth lever, interactive controls. This is where leadership really has to actively engage. It requires executives to step away from their static spreadsheets and have regular, face-to-face dialogue with their teams. They use these systems to actively monitor changing markets, spot emerging threats, and adapt to strategic uncertainties in real time. It ensures the whole company isn't just flying blind into a storm. Section 4. Tone at the top. Now, here is the ultimate reality check, championed by early criminologist Edwin Sutherland. You can have all the diagnostic dashboards, beautifully written credos, and strict rulebooks in the world, but they are completely useless without the right tone at the top. If executives preach integrity but quietly reward managers who take unethical shortcuts, the whole shebang fails. Criminologists call this convenience theory, basically taking the path of least resistance because it's so much easier to just look the other way when the profits are rolling in. Employees will always mirror the true actions of their leadership. So, consider this final thought as we wrap up this explainer. Your compliance checklists might be perfectly checked off and your procedures might be set in stone. But if you look closely at the hidden pressures, the unwritten incentives, and the true tones set by your leadership, is your culture actually an open invitation to the next corporate catastrophe?